So welcome everybody. I'm Kate Colvin, the CEO of Homelessness Australia, and this is the consultation and briefing event on preventing homelessness for children and young people. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're having this conversation on the many unceded lands of Aboriginal nations across the country, and pay respect to elders past and present. I'm joining from Wurundjeri country, and I've just where I've sat, I actually have the Uluru Statement from the Heart behind us. So I think it's very prescient today when we've now got the date for the voice referendum to acknowledge the many times that Aboriginal people have not been listened to in relation to housing and homelessness by governments, and the many times that Aboriginal communities have pointed to the lack of housing and inadequate housing situation as a cause of other issues in the community and been consistently ignored. And even when housing has been delivered, often it's not been delivered in ways that meet community needs. So I can certainly see the enormous impact that having a more powerful way for government to listen to Aboriginal communities would make a difference on the ground in terms of housing outcomes and reducing homelessness. And I would encourage, of course, everyone to take the opportunity being offered us to move forward as a country by the referendum, by creating a voice to Parliament. So what we're here to talk about is the National Housing and Homelessness Plan and what we might hope to see included in it in relation to preventing homelessness for children and young people. But before I hand over to our speakers, I just want to say a little bit about the plan and about what that opportunity is. So people may recall that prior to the last election, the Labor then opposition made a commitment to create a 10-year National Housing and Homelessness Plan. So that was part of their agenda for coming into government. And since being elected, they've restated that commitment and now have begun the process of creating this 10-year National Housing and Homelessness Plan. So it will be a plan of both federal and state governments led by the federal government. And so it has the capacity to include homelessness policy, not just across federal government areas of policy, but also across the states. And that means it potentially is transformative because we know that a lot of the issues that drive homelessness are actually beyond one level of government, and they're beyond just housing and homelessness policy. So in homelessness, of course, we know that domestic and family violence, child abuse and neglect, the level of income support, as well as the amount of housing, all have an impact on housing outcomes. So what we're wanting to say to government is that we want that government to be, we want the national plan to be very ambitious, to be, to have the ambition to end homelessness, and that if you have that ambition, that you would need to be examining, well, what needs to change across many areas of government endeavour to address the drivers of homelessness so that we have less people coming to homeless services. And then we can also talk about, well, if people do become homeless, what's the best responses to them? So to support the process of making those submissions, Homelessness Australia, which is the peak body for homelessness where I work, has put together a key messages document, which I'll put in the chat later, but you can find it on the Homelessness Australia website, which talks about those points about stating that we need a really strong ambition, talking about what's needed to prevent homelessness across different areas, and then talking about best practice responses to homelessness. But in the development of that guide, there's just so much complexity, isn't there? that and so many cohorts to be thinking about where the specific things that we might call for in prevention are particular to that group. And so that's where we've also got these briefing and consultation events, so that we can both share information with you from experts about what's needed to end homelessness related to that cohort, but also have an opportunity to hear from you as the sector. And I imagine also a lot of people who have a lived experience of homelessness have also joined the conversation to hear, well, what else is needed? What do you reflect from your experience as a practitioner or as someone who's experienced homelessness that's needed in this area in the national plan to end homelessness? So it's both an opportunity to hear information, but also to share your views. And so first of all, we'll have about, we've got 3 speakers, and I think that'll be about 45 minutes of content first up. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions and also to have your input. So to kick us off, I'll introduce Associate Professor David McKenzie. Is an academic who's done a great deal of work on youth homelessness and disadvantage, as also the founding director of Upstream Australia, which supports the development of the community of schools and services model of early intervention across Australia. And David's going to talk to us about what's needed to prevent homelessness for children and young people. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Kate. Look, I'm just going to see if I can share my screen. I did test this out before and it did work. So okay, is that fine?
Yes, that's working.
Terrific. Okay. Yeah, working upstream, it's the term we use together with colleagues in other places and other countries to describe trying to prevent homelessness. There's a whole range of things that need to be considered, and hopefully, as Kate was saying, we have a moment, we have an opportunity to work together to input into the process and really strengthen the response. There's obviously a big housing response for young people that's part of the solution. It's not early intervention, but obviously if early intervention fails for young people, then, and they become homeless, they certainly do have a housing problem, and there's some issues, some big issues on that side of the equation. I'll talk to those as well. So I'm going to talk generally about how we probably need to think about, how I think we should think about, or how I propose we should think about early intervention and prevention. And hopefully this will be picked up in the, okay. Look, I've been around for a while, as Kate said, visited many agencies, working with communities, very much working on the practical policy initiatives that need to happen in the early intervention space. And I meet good staff in good agencies doing good work all over the place. So when you hear my critique of the system, it's a critique of the system. It's not a critique of, oh, well, we're not doing good work. People aren't. People do terrific work. When I look as a researcher at the statistics, though, about 43,000 young people, 15 to 24, that's by themselves, on their own, front up to homelessness service seeking help. And that's been going on for more than a decade. Hasn't gone down, goes up and down a little bit. There's about a third of all of the individuals, men, women and children, that are children and young people that seek help. Young people who are the 15 to 24-year-old group, they're 6 out of 10 of the single persons who front up for help. That's apart from families. And when the ABS does its census, there's about 20% who are young people in the age group that we're concerned about. So it is a significant cohort, and it's had a lot of publicity and profile over the years in various submissions and reports. And yet it's been very under-resourced and under-supported in terms of some of the key things that we need to do. So if we just continue the status quo, I think what we'll see happen is that the statistics will continue much as they are. The question is, what do we change? And so the critique of the status quo is not a critique of particular, we've got lots of good programs. In fact, we have one of the best homelessness systems in the world compared to the United States or even the UK. But we can't just do the same old things. But what does that mean? Now, I was involved in some research that was published through AU with some other colleagues, and often when we spoke to people out there, and I know a lot of you would be working in crisis services, so I want to make sure this point is well understood. When you ask people on the ground who are facing a tsunami of need that's coming at them and working their butts off, doing the difficult work in a crisis service, they often say, you know, we need more crisis accommodation. In some places, that's true. That is certainly true. It's understandable from the lived experience as you deal with one case after another. And it certainly feels intuitively right when you're working at that coalface. But if we try and think about it from a systems point of view, then if you look on the right side of that slide, the metaphor is, you know, if we want to reduce the road toll, we don't put more trauma beds in hospitals, do we? We implement air beds, seat belts, speed cameras, safer cars, we improve road conditions. These are all preventative measures, and we have done those in Australia and very successfully reduced the road toll significantly. You certainly need trauma beds, and we need good hospitals and medical services, obviously. So how do we think about this, and what would it look like? I thought I might start by just quickly referring to the three reports that are very much currently in play at the moment in the work towards the agreement and the plan. There was an inquiry during COVID in Victoria. I won't read that out, but the key finding was that we must reorient away from purely crisis management. And what do we need? We need early intervention programs to prevent people as far as possible from entering and becoming homeless. And we need the procurement of sufficient long-term housing, affordable and social and supported housing. They're the two great challenges that we are behind the eight ball on. So that's the Victorian report. And believe it or not, as most of you probably know, there was also another inquiry going on in the federal parliament, the inquiry into homelessness in Australia. And it also reiterated some of the same messages, perhaps not quite as clear a report, but certainly arguing for a place-based approach and certainly reiterating the need for homelessness prevention and early intervention. So both of those reports are pretty much delivering a very strong message there, as well as a whole lot of stuff around the development of supported housing, etc., which we desperately need. And you probably haven't read this report, but the Productivity Commission, and I don't always agree with what the Productivity Commission comes out with, I have to say, but they put out a report called In Need of Repair. And this was a review of the previous National Housing and Homelessness Agreement. I think that the title speaks to it, says everything. They pointed out that the previous agreement wasn't a reform agreement. They've argued very strongly that prevention early should be a high priority in the new thing, as well as a whole number of other things. And interestingly, a separate pool of funding for prevention early intervention programs to address homelessness. And the other thing, which was not a recommendation but a suggestion, is that they had a big critique about the first home buyers allowance, which does not really help first home buyers very much, and it certainly interferes with the market and pushes prices up, and suggested that nearly $3 billion given to first home buyers things should be moved across to prevention. And I'd give that a big tick, but of course that's probably not going to happen, I would say. But some clear messages there. So I think prevention and early intervention is on the agenda. So I just want to talk a little bit about this, because this is kind of the framework that I use, and my colleagues who did the research with us and in the development work that we're doing. It's kind of what's called a stock and flow thing. It's some of the things that we need to do, and it's not exhaustive list, by the way, before homelessness to be preventative. And of course, you can't prevent every young person becoming homeless. That's not going to be possible. But we do need to have supported pathways, rapid rehousing and pathways to housing. So I'm just going to go through a few of these, because this is kind of at least how I'm thinking, and some of my colleagues are thinking about it. We do have access points in Victoria, but nowhere else. So that's something we've advocated to be considered throughout Australia in terms of the other jurisdictions. I'll speak briefly about the COS model, the Community of Services and Schools model, which is a place-based collective impact approach of bringing schools and services, picking up adolescents, integrating the services with new institutions in a community, measuring risk. There's a population screening process that we've got. There's a very strong data approach that we've got, and a very strong approach to measuring outcomes. So collective impact's a pretty different way of doing things. It really tries to extinguish competition between the agencies within a community and get them to actually work together in a common cause, wherever that's possible. Paul will speak about this and other things, but the Home Stretch initiative and campaign, a terrific thing that's been done, is that we know that young people leaving care are particularly vulnerable. And the issue there for me would be to make sure that they get the necessary support to prevent the 30 or 40% of them that become homeless after they leave an aged out of care. There's other things like the Ruby's model of family reconciliation that was started in South Australia. I think that's good. There's the Kids Undercover initiatives, the Village, and the units that they put in family backyards where a young person would otherwise go somewhere else and become homeless. There's a range of quite tested things out there which need to be scaled up significantly so we have a systemic response that starts to make a measurable difference to the whole population, certainly in certain communities to begin with, and then hopefully across the board. And on the other side are a number of the housing options that I think are important. Young people are a large proportion of those in the homelessness system and in homelessness, but they only get into about 2.2 to 3% of mainstream social housing. And there's the business model for mainstream social housing is a problem for young people on such low incomes, etc. I've been involved with, I have to say, with the My Foundation's Youth Housing Company, and that's, I think, the world's first youth-specific, youth-focused housing company. And we hope that there might be a couple of others set up in Australia. But this is a model where social housing for young people, for most young people, is not a lifetime destination. It's a long-term transitional thing that they need at a particularly vulnerable period in their lives. And it's been very successful, and particularly in New South Wales, but we're hoping to expand it. The youth foyers you'd be familiar with. They've been developed over the past decade. I had a lot to do with the advocacy for that and very much support the idea of linking education with supported accommodation. I have to admit I'm somewhat critical that they don't take more young people out of specialist homelessness services when they leave. And I think that's a reform that I hope that the foyer sector will consider because it's homelessness money that's basically being invested in the youth foyer model. So it's a good model, needs a little bit of tweaking to be more effective. And the New South Wales Youth Choices Program supplements Commonwealth rent assistance. There's been an increase of that, I think about 15%. You probably know the figure, Kate. But it's not enough. And in the previous sort of levels, young people that got that CRA, Commonwealth Rental Assistance, about 2/3 of them were still in terrible housing stress, even with that subsidy. So there's some work to be done there still, I believe. So that's the framework that I think really, I hope the national plan will adopt in terms of young people. There are some very specialist things that need to be considered for children who are on their own, 12-year-olds, 13. It's not a large number, but they are particularly vulnerable. And that's been an issue for a long, long time where we've not, it bounces back between the homelessness sector and care and protection. So Paul might comment on that later. Look, very quickly, I talked about the COS model. It is collective impact. I think one of the big changes that we might think about, I hope people will think about and support, is a place-based approach, which is returning to a more community level focused approach And we can do that community by community. So as a reform agenda, we don't have to sort of run it across the board. We don't have to raise it to the ground other things, but we can work community by community. And if we can make a significant difference and actually reduce the number of young people experiencing homelessness, then government will be encouraged to hopefully invest more and more to do it in more and more communities that are disadvantaged around the country. This is a diagram we use to kind of graphically try and show. On the left, it's the existing system, which is largely crisis-oriented with very little, hardly any prevention and inadequate housing for young people. And what we need is to expand those two before and after sectors. And it's really the crisis services that we should be delivering the early intervention support, a la the COS model or anything else, as well as supporting young people in social housing. It's actually a broadened responsibility for the terrific services that we do have around the country. The only thing about the second diagram on the right, it does show that we want more prevention and more housing. I don't mean necessarily we would be shrinking emergency and crisis services. It looks like that's what's being suggested there, but it's not. But that's kind of the rebalancing of the system that I think we need. And hopefully we'll start to get through the new agreement and the plan. We shall see. So the difference that I'm very keen to argue for is, the current status quo of siloed service delivery and targeted programs. Some programs are good, and look, I won't name them, but there's programs that are not so good, might I say, that don't have demonstrated outcomes but are still funded. That's the status quo. It's not good enough. While we've got good things, we've also got a lot of legacy stuff that needs to be perhaps repurposed. And I think in the repurposing, I would strongly want to argue, and I'll be interested in some of your feedback and comments, on a place-based approach, a collective impact approach, which I think puts more responsibility to the sector and a much more integrated thing. I think we've demonstrated in a few of the funded sites just how effective that can be, and there's a growing evidence base for that. So I think I've probably got to the end of my time there, Kate. I hope those few ideas for how to think about early intervention and what it might mean are helpful, and I'm happy to hand it over to... Okay. Have I stopped the sharing?
Let me just, not quite.
Oh, stop. Okay.
Stop slideshow. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much, David. That's great. I just to look at a different screen. So I'll now introduce Paul McDonald. Paul is and sorry, just before I do that, so just to confirm, and a few people joined while David was talking, we'll do questions at the end of all of the speakers, and then we can have a sort of panel discussion rather than doing questions one at a time. So just introducing Paul McDonald, the CEO of Anglicare Victoria, which is Victoria's largest provider of foster care, family welfare and youth support services. Paul's also led the National Homestretch campaign, which has succeeded now in extending the provision of support to young people in out-of-home care from 18 to 21 years in every state and territory across Australia to differing degrees, but still every state and territory, which is just an absolutely remarkable achievement. So over to you, Paul.
Oh, thanks, thanks, Kate. Great to be here, and congratulations to you, Kate, Homelessness Australia, for putting on this fantastic webinar and chat. And hello to the 84 comrades out there. Good on you for joining the webinar. Hey, I'm Paul McDonald. I'm on Wurundjeri country here, so I want to pay my respects to elders, both past, present and emerging, and honour the land that they've looked after over thousands of years, and thanks for that. And, of course, vote yes. So let's get into what we're here talking about. And this has been, this is really great. I'm feeling like we've got a movement going on here, because just recently, about a month and a half ago, we had the National Child and Youth Homeless Conference. if you're all, many of you would have attended that. And now Kate's backed up with a Homelessness Australia consultation for the National Homeless Plan, which is really good. Maybe we're getting momentum, because I'd have to argue that there hasn't been a whole lot of momentum for child and youth homelessness going over the last 15, 20 years. Now, in previous decades, and unfortunately, see that grey hair there, I do go back a little way. And I go back to where the 2 Burdekin inquiries into homelessness happened. I do go back to when Kevin Rudd, when he was announced as Prime Minister, said on election night to his newly elected MPs for the government, he said, the first thing I want you to do in the next 2 weeks is go and visit a homeless refuge. Man. But since then, it's been a pretty dry in relation to policy for children and young people. And I think it's an interesting approach in relation to dealing with one of the most serious social policy issues going around, and that is just not affordable housing. That's not the most serious social policy issue. It is the numbers of children and young people that are homeless in this country, in a population of 25 million or so in this country, and what is happening there. Now, we're not seeing probably the same DNA by this National Homelessness Plan that we've seen in big other social policy reforms. The Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse, the reform of the NDIS, the Royal Commission into Aged Care. So government and federal government have chosen this sort of pathway of getting a national homelessness plan first with the Federation. Me, it's the long way round. However, at least it's in a direction of where we think we need to go. But I wonder whether there's much heart or much motivation about dealing with the child and youth homelessness part of this issue. I'll tell you what I did just the last couple of days, because I've got nothing else going on in my life. I read the issues paper, 75 pages. Now, if you multiply 75 pages by about 30 lines of copy per page, you'll get to about 2,200 or something, 2,000, my maths aren't great, 2,250 lines of copy. Well, I can tell you there's something like 52 lines of copy that refer to child and youth homelessness in the consultation plan, right? 52. You do the maths, right, about the percentage terms. I'm not sure if the heartbeat strongs in the Labor government in Feds about this has been an issue. And I think part of our discussion and consultation is not only about what we want to put in the plan, but understand that we're yet to win the political hearts. To win the hearts, and then you win the mind, the hearts that this is a burning issue of child and youth homelessness. And I'll come back to that. I mean, it actually led me to ask. I was at the National Youth Homelessness Conference and I couldn't help myself. So just after we had a session on campaigning, which was quite interesting discussion. And then 5 federal politicians came to discuss it's almost the second last session of the National Child and Youth Homeless Plan about what to do about child and youth homelessness. And it was a 50-minute discussion. 40 minutes in, I put up my hand. And, oh, we've got a question. Yes, Paul. I said, look, I'm just sorry to ask, Paul McDonald, I'm sorry to ask, but we've been going for 40 minutes now with 5 federal politicians, and not once at the Child and National Homelessness Conference have I heard the word young people or youth or child in their presentations. Does Canberra actually like young people, I asked, because all I heard was affordable housing, rental freezes, cost of living, all largely irrelevant for this cohort. And I'm going to explain why. So in preparation for this talk that Kate asked me to get the juices flowing with the group, I went down to our 2 youth refuges that we operate, Anglicare Victoria. I'll tell you who was in there. All right. One is a mixed 9-bedder and mixed sex. And another one is young women only. The only actually state young women only here in Victoria. I mean, how about that? The only youth homeless refuge for young women in Victoria. That's ridiculous. Why we got that? I don't know, but that's something we need to address. But let me go to the figures. Who was in Well, there was three homeless due to family violence, one due to family breakdown, and one due to a housing crisis. In the other, there was 2 presented due to housing crisis, 3 in the Women's House due to family breakdown, and 2 due to family violence. Now, when you have a look at the SHIP data, it's pretty consistent that over the last 6 months, the main reason young people are seeking assistance is family and domestic violence, 30%, a third, followed by housing crisis, 17%, and family relationship breakdown, code for family violence or parental violence in that regard, 15%. So put those together, around 45%, nearly half have been driven by family violence or family fractures and dysfunction in the family home. And the difficulty about moving this population is they're absolutely ill-equipped to start thinking about shared housing, start thinking about I'm economically independent enough. This issue has been forced upon them. They haven't prepared for it. And number 2 is that they, in fact, actually, when we talk about, and as Kate rightly says, that the drivers in child and youth homelessness is family violence, let's first of all talk about the under 12 who can accompany mum to the refuges, who can accompany the parent, but the over 12, very tricky too. That we're seeing that, in fact, uncertain options for mum who makes the decision, and usually it's mum who makes the decision to flee, not enough options for dad to look at his poor behaviour through men's behaviour change, caring dads a better way, a number of evidence-based models that government have invested, but only in pilots, not in scale, so not offering the perpetrator enough opportunity to confront their behaviour. But have a look at the teen. Now, the issues paper doesn't cover this, but young people are voting with their feet about their family circumstances and violence. It's not that I choose to be, it's not like I have made myself homeless, like other cohorts or whatever you like to call about it. It's been imposed on them. And thus, they've found themselves in that situation. So I think there's a number of things to consider when we're talking about prevention. And I'm going to say this. The current debate on housing, whilst it's active, whilst it's good, is largely irrelevant for this cohort. Largely irrelevant. This group don't fare well in the waiting rooms of real estate agents. This group don't fare well in the waiting rooms of social housing associations. This group don't fare well in shared housing. This group, so what the debate's going on, and that's why I got so annoyed at the National with those 5 politicians. I mean, you know, everyone can get sucked in, and I think possibly government hiding behind the debate of, oh, yes, the engine room, cost of living, oh, yes, more stock, affordable housing. That meanwhile, young people and children are homeless in this country, in motels, on couches, in refuges, without the helping hand of the federal government developing a pathway out of that scenario. So here's maybe my 5 areas of prevention that I think we can take on. One is about parenting. Now, little is discussed about the role of parenting and how it's driving youth homelessness and in that regard. And I've talked a little bit about the need to actually have docked-in housing options for the exiting mum with the children away, or exiting father and moving then on in relation to their family violence. So the availability of how can we take the heat of this situation? Well, where is it? You know, the range of parenting zone parenting programs I run in my organisation are overprescribed. And there's Congo lines at the door when you put parenting and adolescent. They come from nowhere, queued up, saying, can we get into this workshop? Can we get into this group? Can we get into this? We are not allowing, we're not helping, giving the helping hand to the parent to cope with the adolescent and deal with the adolescent and the different conflicts that an adolescent and a parent, one developing adult, one an adult, have with each other. Number 2, we could take off a lot of heat off these situations if we actively gave the permission for parents to actually drop a studio apartment in the backyard, to offering take the heat off the family situation, which the young person doesn't have to flee. And let's remember, why are you saying this, Paul? Well, let's remember 45% of those hitting our youth refuges are because of getting out of the family conflict. We're not giving a sanctum for a young person to go to inside the family home. Why can't we actually offer economically and promote this as sort of studio apartment or out the back or studio in the backyard and start to drop this as a nature of urban life here in Australia? Certainly this was the case many decades ago. You know, I had a grandmother in which she housed her brother out the back in a comfy shed, but in the shed, and that was not an uncommon thing in Brunswick in those years. And so that's how we need to actually start to think about maybe taking the heat off the family, what's happening in the one roof, by offering a second roof, but within the same sort of area. Number 3, the biggest parent of all. Who's the biggest parent of all in Australia? It's the state. The state's the biggest parent of all. They have the legal guardianship at any one time of around 58,000 children and young people in this country. 58,000. Eight parents, 58,000. Serious numbers. David McKenzie, in his youth homeless survey a number of years ago, 400 he interviewed young homeless people, 62% were care leavers. So it's been fantastic exercise, and I hope you take a lot of faith and belief, because many of you were supporters of Homestretch, that change is possible. We got 8 governments to formally prescribe their care and support to 21, formally. It's so Perth to Penrith, Darwin to Devonport. If you're in care, the state will look after you in a resource way by providing a worker to 21. But don't be fooled. They haven't finished and the job is not done. They now need to provide stock for that if the young person wishes to leave their home-based care, like a foster care, kinship care, or for the 5% who are coming out of residential care, need to provide housing. And I'll tell you what the evidence is. When you offer a young person extended care to 21, 55%, even if they're in with their foster carer, will take up the option of living independently. Thanks, foster care mum and dad. You've been fantastic. I love what you've done, but I want to try it on my own. Just like my 2 at home. No, they've been in and out twice in that sense, giving it a go of out. So, and they're back again, by the way. But anyway, that's another story. So, but 55%. Now, we've got to guarantee government, as I said to one minister, you can't make this reform. You cannot make this reform without guaranteeing stock. It's irresponsible. You've now formally committed to care for the child or the young person through to 21. What comes with that, of course, is housing. And so we've got to lock the 8 states into that housing provision for this as a result of this new reform. And I'll tell you why. Because if you get that right, 50% conservatively of that cohort who drive youth homelessness, which is about 2/3, will reduce in relation to their housing. And the third thing that I probably wouldn't mind just addressing in this issue is about when I said models are largely irrelevant. They are. Now, why aren't we trying, along with the studio in the backyard, the models that we do know work, but young people feel supported in? The clustered housing with the lead tenant or adult on site but not in their lives or kitchens, like the Village 21 model, offers governments a lot of confidence that, in fact, those type of models could be scaled and start to accommodate the transition that a young person from care will make into a semi-independent, pretty independent, but a adult hovering around in a group environment and then on to independent. Or the Compass Social Impact Bond, which is now just put through 200 care leavers through independent, standalone stock housing, in which they paid a scaled rent over 2 years. So they came in with a social housing rent, you know, the 20% of income, but by the time they exited, they're paying market rent income, right? That scaled version up to market rent income. Now I'm talking about young people coming straight out of residential care. No, give them an opportunity. They'll pay you back in spades and they'll handle the rent. 85% of the 200 manage that scenario with support, with an external support. And for young women, what are we doing for young women in this country who are homeless? For goodness sake, there's been movements, I think the recognition that young women are homeless and thus we're increasing their vulnerability for things to go badly wrong is an absolute scandal and has to be addressed. So the final thing I'll say is I think our narrative has to change for children and youth homeless. I don't think the current narrative, in the current way we describe homelessness in this country, is working for children and young people. We've got to absolutely re-trigger the hearts in the political classes. Maybe we've got to go back and all of us take a local MP down to our local refuge. Not a bad idea. And I just took a minister through a residential care unit, 5 of them, just the other month, and it was a life-changing experience. And so we've got to actually go, the narrative for children and youth is not about affordable housing, rental freezes, stop the Airbnbs. Come on. Let's bring a housing model that says these young people are like our own, that will bring them up and will raise them into this. That means family, options for parenting, handling the adolescent, dropping a studio in the backyard. That means for firm stock for the young homeless woman, the care leaver, those that in fact actually have found themselves in circumstances, no fault of their own, absolutely belongingless. Bad English, but it's true. And finally, I think we've got to move government and not be obfuscated. I love the 10-year vision. I love the national plan, but can someone actually make a commitment here, a commitment for these minors? This cohort are yet to be fully developed. This cohort warrants the adult action. This cohort needs us and government to act on their behalf. And that's why we've got to change the narrative to bring attention to this issue. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks so much, Paul. Always love the passion. Can I now introduce Joelle Presincula, who experienced homelessness as a young person, also as a child. Has also been a peer worker in the homelessness sector. So in Victoria, we had a trial of peer workers. It's one of the first peer worker in the homeless sector projects around the country, and Joelle was part of that. So has a really unique perspective, both as someone who's been a client of homeless services, but also worked in homeless services and is also involved in the peer education support program at Victoria's Peak Body Council of Homeless Persons to offer us today. So Joelle, over to you. Please feel free to comment on what the other speakers have said about what's needed to prevent homelessness from your own reflections, but also tell us about just generally what you think needs to happen to prevent homelessness for children and young people.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Paul, you're a very hard act to follow, that's for sure. You're so passionate about preventative youth homelessness. So it's really good to hear your insights, and you, David, as well. I think, after hearing you guys, I was definitely one of those youth who experienced homelessness. And, David said the ABS data was, 6 out of 10 people who came into the homelessness services was unaccompanied youth. I was one of those. And, we have a system that doesn't really focus on prevention and early intervention at all. So we can only really work within the bounds of what we have. And, I'm a realist, and we don't have a system currently that really focuses on intervention and early prevention and early intervention. And when I look back, I would have loved to have had my schools known, or me feeling safe enough to let my school know that I was experiencing homelessness. So as a teen, my mum my mum worked 2 jobs. She worked day and night to buy a house after experiencing domestic violence herself. She had 4 kids under 5 and left and worked her bum off to buy a home. And my mum lost that home due to her experiencing her own trauma and not being able to afford the mortgage anymore. So when we had to leave our family home, I was doing my year 11 and 12, and mum was put, thankfully, because we're in competition with 10 other families, they told us, mum accessed a service, and we were put into a transitional house that was quite small for the 4 kids, the 4 teenagers, and the mum with clinical depression. And I left at the age of 16, and I looked after myself. So I accessed services as a young person myself. And I still went to school. I still did my year 11 and 12, and I would access services, and I would, and it was all through word of mouth. So I had no idea about the service system. I was a young person. Everything was through word of mouth. It was other kids who had experienced homelessness saying, go to that service. This is what they'll do. This is how they'll help. Because I had no idea. And also I had no idea I was experiencing homelessness either. I just thought my family was going through stuff, and something's going on with my family. My family's not normal. We're not normal. We're just going through a tough time. And I had no idea I was experiencing homelessness, even though I was couch surfing for a few years. And I did my year 11 and 12, and sometimes I'd live over an hour away on public transport to go to school, and nobody knew. My friends kind of knew. They just thought, oh, something's up with her and her family. The school had no idea. I ended up doing my year 11 and 12 at TAFE. TAFE didn't know. Nobody knew. And I think back and I wonder what would have happened if I let the school know that I was experiencing homelessness, and were they even equipped to assist me? What would they have done anyway? So if we did have a system where we encourage schools to get themselves educated first about the homelessness system, and then better support kids when they do disclose that they're experiencing homelessness, so that the schools can be maybe an access point, or, have partnerships with access points where they can be better equipped to help young people. Because where are the touch points that these young people are having their lives? And school's one of them. And it would have been so easy for me to not go to school. And then where's my next touch point? I was involved recently in a research piece about doctors, and what if doctors, because I did have a doctor. Even as a 15-year-old, I still had a doctor, because 15, 16, I was experiencing homelessness. I still needed a doctor, and I'd take myself off to the doctor because I was a young person who needed assistance, and I was experiencing homelessness. And what if doctors were a touch point where they could educate us about where to go and what to do when you're experiencing homelessness? What is an access point, and what do you do? I feel like the service system just really isn't set up currently to really speak to young people about what can you do early on in the piece. And, Paul, you said that at the youth homelessness conference, the politicians didn't mention young people until 40 plus minutes in, when you mentioned, when you discussed, do you even care about young people? I think always keeping young people at the center you know, about what we're doing. You know, David said we've got good workers, but we can only do the good work within the bounds of what we can do. And a lot of workers come in as into the sector because we've got a lived experience, and we've all got a lived experience of something. And, you know, a lot of workers I've worked with all disclose to me they have a lived experience of something, and that's why they got into the sector, to give back or to make a change. Because most workers have good hearts, and most workers do come from a place of wanting to make a change and wanting to help. Again, we can only help within the bounds of the policy that we have. And I do think asking young people, keeping lived experience at the centre of what we're doing, scaling up what works, funding what works. The research is there. It's already there regarding what works and what doesn't. And for me, what got me out of breaking the cycle of experiencing homelessness was going into a youth refuge. I was in and out of experiencing homelessness on and off. By the time I was 24, I just scraped in, got into a youth refuge. At that time, my daughter was 2.5, and that youth refuge changed my life. They weren't a foyer, but at the time TAFE was free, and I was funded to, you know, just get a laptop, and I started my diploma right there and then in that refuge. And I was only there for 3 months, but I finished that diploma, you know, and it was the beginning of the rest of my life, sort of thing. So yeah, there are things we can do within the bounds of the policy and the bounds that we have. And it's just being creative, keeping that young person always at the center, and asking that person you're supporting, what can I do for you? And, you know, someone said in the chat before that young people have experienced such trauma that you can't house youth with other people because it just doesn't work because of the trauma. So we've got to be more trauma informed in that way, and you know, leading, always being person centered, always being trauma informed in our practice, and working within the policy that we have. And we can just still do good work because we still have good workers. And I do look forward to seeing what happens in this space. And thank you so much, Kate, for the opportunity to speak.
No worries. Thank you so much, Joelle. I really appreciate that. So now it's sort of over to the audience. If you've got any questions, or if you want to, if you think there's anything in preventing child and youth homelessness that hasn't been raised that you think's a priority, now's the time to make that contribution. So I think if you just use the hand thing, which you can access in the bottom row of Zoom, to put your hand up, then I'll be able to see you and I can call on you to speak. So Diana, over to you first. So you just have to unmute.
Thank you. Oh, that was quick. I just wanted to ask, because I work with a lot of, all my clients are young people. And I think the biggest thing that I find is like the barriers is the eligibility criteria for a lot of to access housing for these young people. You know, a lot of these young people have trauma and mental health and physical health on top of it. And it's just more, how do we prevent homelessness in a way for these young people when most housing organizations have a certain criteria, such as like they need to be working or studying, when they're not in the mental space to do so. And if there is one that doesn't have that strict criteria, the waiting list is like up to 6 months. And for a young person, they need it's there's no 6 months waiting. So yeah, for their own lives. So my question is more like, what do we do? Like how can we as a nation really assist when it end of the day it does come down to funding, and therefore also comes down to criteria for that particular organization.
Thanks, Diana. Yeah, I think it's not a surprise that young people who are fleeing domestic and family violence or child abuse and neglect in the home are feeling traumatized, that are not necessarily ready to be in education and are not in work. So what do we do in that situation? Who would like to step in with a response?
Oh, look, I'll have a quick go, and thanks, Diana, for the question. And we had a young fellow, actually. It reminds me of a young fellow, actually. He'd been with us in a resi unit for about 4 years, and had lived around a lot of workers, great, and the whole routine, and it went very well. And then he had to move, or he was placed in a house about a block away. 3 days later, he's knocking on the door. Listen, does someone know how to turn on a pilot light? Because I can't get the gas, or the gas isn't working. And you see, that just goes to show that we have a P plate or a probationary system for a young person at 18 to drive a car. And that goes through for 2 years, about how many occupants you can have. We have in some states a dual track system in the justice environment, in which even though you're 19, 20, 21, you'll be considered within a youth detention sentencing rather than adult detention. There's a range of mechanisms, there's institutions that recognise the developing young adult is not yet quite ready to hold the whole responsibility of whatever we're talking about. Yet we go from 100 to 0 the other way. We go from 100 to 0 when dropping a young person straight out of a family conflict situation, or dropping a young person straight out of a care situation into a housing environment. And 0 means 0 readiness, skills, whatever. And I don't buy the line, all we need to do is train young people into budgeting and train how to do. They're not interested in going to training about budgeting. They live in the moment. So the moment is when they start to learn, not in preparation. This is the nature of this cohort that we don't understand. So my answer to you is that we've got to think about whether we're thinking about chaperone housing or developmental housing, or in a sense, and I don't mean by transitional housing, which is a bit of a glib phrase for you're passing from homelessness into ongoing, but I actually mean by in relation to the physiological development that's going on in the human being. And we know by the time they turn to 22, they still can only deal with one serious decision, along with a range of other micro decisions. A 22-year-old can only still really make a clear call on one decision at any one time, as in life, rather than. So this is what I think you're suggesting, Diana, is sort of like us being more sensitized to this journey of dropping into housing and starting to see, you can't get away with not putting a chaperone, a worker visiting, a support mentor, coach beside you. Governments cannot get away with housing this cohort without that, particularly in the young adult years.
Let me make a couple of comments. I gave a talk, Paul referred to the cost of youth homelessness stuff, and after I'd given the talk, a very senior person in another jurisdiction came up to me and he quoted the statistic that you quoted, Paul. And he said, "Oh, good talk, David. Well, we don't really want young people in social housing, do we?" And I said, "Well, that's a policy that's working." And I just want to sort of supplement what Paul said by saying that the social housing that I've been involved in developing through my foundation provides secure housing for up to 5 years on a scalable rent model that we've developed. And it has support. I wouldn't call it chaperoning, but I'd call it support as the young people need it with the local youth service and the local workers that are in the youth service. So it's a kind of supported housing. Some young people don't need much support. Other young people need quite a lot. There's 300 or 400 young people, but getting the dollars to actually, we've just bought our first property in New South Wales, to scale this up to the extent that I think we all agree it's needed. A priority's got to be given in the National Housing Future Fund for young people, as well as women escaping domestic violence, which I totally support. There needs to be much greater investment. And it's, as Paul said earlier, you know, it's treated as an adult thing for families and adults and not something that young people need on the lowest incomes with all the sort of problems that they experience in today's sort of situations. So, you know, that's one of the key things that we need to do. And there's various really well tried and tested models for a range of housing type things that we've spoken about today, but they've got to be scaled up, and that means investment from government to do it. Yeah, so that's my response. I agree with what's been said. We can do it, but we've got to invest in the models that actually do it in the way that we're talking about, the way that you seek, what you seek.
Thanks to both of you. Kate Hamilton, did you want to ask a question or make a comment? Just unmute.
Yes, thanks, Kate. Yeah, look, I absolutely agree. It is about scaling up the investment. And I guess, look, I was one of those lead tenants in 1981 at the Carlton walk-up flats with the Salvos. And that was a brilliant model, and people did learn how to turn pilot lights on. I know exactly what you mean, Paul. While we are working in my agency at least under this 12-week case management model from woe to go, young people who are homeless, we have 12 weeks. We simply cannot get the breadth of work done. So we've got a really understanding manager, and sometimes I work for up to 12 months with a young person. But, you know, once again, most youth refuges are 6 weeks. If you're lucky, you'll get into transitional housing. Where do most of these young people go? They go back to what they know. So I think we need to scale things up. I think we need to look at age and stage of development. Many young people have so much trauma in their lives, certainly the ones that I've seen recently. They're simply not ready to go out on their own, let alone into shared housing, which often becomes rooming houses. We've seen the growth of rooming houses in the southeast of Melbourne over the last 10 years. It's excruciating, and it's not cheap. And then with the risk-averse nature of case management, many workers are not able to go into those rooming houses to provide services for people. So I know there's a whole lot of things there, but yeah, I like the idea of lead tenant, but in order to provide that kind of ongoing support, we need to scale it up and spend a lot more money. And hopefully in those early prevention services, we're going to see some change.
Thanks, Kate. I can't see any other questions, so I'm going to pose one, which is that we know that a lot of the young people that end up at homeless services are from the LGBTIQ plus community and end up in situations where their families reject them, or there's conflict in the home around their gender identity or their sexuality. So I wonder if people have any views about what we can do to better support those young people and also better support perhaps their families so that they're supported to be more accepting of young people, and the young person doesn't feel like they need to vote with their feet and leave the home.
I might just kick off very briefly to say, from the experience that we've had in the COS model sites, I want to say that one of the problems we've got with schools is we want to work with schools and we want to work in schools, but there are limitations of focusing welfare support and other supports purely inside of schools, because when schools fail young people, they leave. It's terrific that you've finished year 12, Joelle, and some young people do, but many, many, many more leave. They just leave. Problem goes away. So it's got to be a community approach. But when the work has to be with the young person and the family, now that applies as well to LGBTQI young people, because it may be possible to resolve some of those issues or not, but you have to work through them. And the only way you can do that is by engaging with the family and working through things. So, you know, in the experience we have, often reconciliation is possible and there is some change that can occur. Families often have a whole range of things going on, and who's there to help them? These workers, these early intervention workers, are the sort of appropriate workers to go in there working with the young people, of course, but also working with their family members. And you find mental health issues, you find obviously issues of poverty, all sorts of domestic violence, everything you could think of will be found in various cases that you encounter when you're doing that sort of work. But you do get a lot of positive outcomes. I remember in Geelong that the youth refuge there, for a long time, hardly anyone ever went back from the youth refuge to return home. But after the sort of work was started around early intervention, quite significant, I think it was about 40% of those young people, some work was done. It was found that it was possible for them to return to the home safely if you did that kind of early intervention work. So, I guess that's my point. You have to work with families. It's got to be, youth focused but family centered, and whichever way that goes, whether it's reconciliation or a young person has to be supported to live independently, then so be it.
My short comment is, first of all, hey, you're right. It's a strong driver to youth homelessness, sexual identity, and enough to get into double digits and very significant. And look, if we can start talk to government about let's disrupt this pathway. Is mediation possible? And a young person's not going to say, yeah, I want to mediate. No, you really got to cajole them along. Come on, let's get a third party in there to actually help communicate. Now, whether that's possible or not, I think we're under trying, if I can put it like that. We're just not trying hard enough about that pathway, given that 55% of the young people that are sleeping last night in our homeless refuges were all driven by some sense around that family breakdown. Number two, that's why I'm suggesting possibly actually live on the property, but maybe not under the roof. Because, we've got allow a young person a bit of sort of privacy and independence, and maybe, and yet they've got the connection of home that for some, they can live out their sexual identity and not feel sort of scrutinised, and yet remain within the course of to be quite sort of property or geographic orientated, in the back. And what are those options, and what do those options look like? I think exploring those with families. I just think we go from, talking about 100 to 0 to 100 in the sense of saying, well, I can't say I'm getting no empathy about that. And then the third thing is about, what communities or ways or places in which we can help these young people actually establish themselves independently. If home is not an option, or I'm just being actually reminded of the poor choices but this is who I am, or I'm reminded of my, this doesn't fit with the family, or embarrassing, whatever the poor, the dreadful reason, just due to their sexual identity that they've been made. So I'm just not sure. This is why I think some of the debate, Kate, on this issue in prevention has to go to sub-cohorts. We just can't talk youth here because, that's 12 to 25. We're doing stuff. No, let's talk about young women. Let's talk about LGBTQI identity. Let's talk about those coming out of care. I think the language in our National Child and Youth Homelessness Plan for this cohort is about the sub-cohorts, and not sort of sweep over like icing over a cake, that it's just one driver or one sort of sub-cohort of the larger homelessness cohort. It requires one in this age group to look at who we got within here, rather than, dare I say it, within the adult age group, you can be more generalised.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Natalie, did you want to say something?
I sure did. Hi there. So my question was, this issue is kind of like an onion, and it has many layers. And as we just started touching on with the last comment, recognising the, I guess, sub-cohorts, one that I've noticed that hasn't really been mentioned at all today has been the disability sector, which is what I represent. So, the young people within that cohort are even more at risk because of safety issues and the education and safety and availability of who to speak out to when experiencing those same issues. We talk about the young people who don't have special needs having to have that responsibility laid on their shoulders that it's an adult issue. Well, how much more so confronting and overwhelming is it for a person with a special need? whether it be, Down syndrome, whether it be on the spectrum of ASD, ADHD, anything, a physical disability. So that's my, I guess, statement and question.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. And can I just add to that I don't know how widespread this is, but one of the outcomes, it seems, of the NDIS is that I remember being at a government conversation in Victoria about housing for young people with an intellectual disability. And they were saying that whilst prior to the NDIS, there would have been spaces in residential, like in accommodation for young people in that situation, that now they were just exiting from child services into homelessness because there wasn't any accommodation suitable for them.
That, or there's inappropriate accommodation available where young people are going into aged care facilities because that's the only accommodation that's available to them.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the issues that when you start to pay attention to the diversity that you find amongst young people when you're working with young people and the sub cohorts, etc., is that the restrictions on practice that are placed on crisis services are so unhelpful. The responsibility for deciding what needs to be done. Look, some people, you can do things more efficiently and whatever, and other people need a lot more time. That sort of responsibility, in my view, should be placed with the workers and the agencies. And it's kind of restrictive work practice. It should be banned because it actually interferes with the getting of outcomes, because you're basically doing a one-size-fits-all. You've got these time limits around what you can do. And I know in the early intervention work that we've managed to get funded, there's no restrictions. We herald efficiency as well as effectiveness, and you do what is needed by particularly young people. And some young people need little. So it's a very tiered approach. And I think that's really allows the flexibility to the practitioners to do whatever's necessary, whether it's a person with disabilities or an LGBTQI young person or whatever it is, or very high and complex needs, really difficult issues. That's got to be a clinical practice decision on the ground within agencies and by workers, in my opinion.
Thanks, David. Any other questions or comments or things that people think haven't been raised that are still important issues to be raised?
I've got a comment, Kate. I just wanted to say, when speaking about sub-cohorts like the LGBTQI cohort and, kids with youth with disabilities, the general population of with people who experience homelessness, the mortality rate is higher, and it's just it's just how it is. It's the nature of the work, and it's the nature of how things are. People pass away quicker than the general public due to the trauma of experiencing homelessness. And then when it comes to the LGBT community, the youth that experience homelessness in that cohort in particular, again, are at high risk of violence and at high risk of taking their own life due to the trauma they experience due to experiencing homelessness, and the disconnection from family and the rejection from family. And I think David and Paul are correct when they say that having the space outside to have still be within the family bounds, but sort of a bit of leeway outside, still have that family protection, but also have their own personal space at the back. Things like that, it's just, you can't discount how important that is, especially when youth are passing away because of their experience of experiencing homelessness. So I think that, we can't discount how small or great the work that you do, the work that we can do, is vital, because of the cohort we're working with do pass away quicker than the general public. And I think that that's a serious thing that we need to consider.
Yeah, thanks, Joelle. And I think it's just, I mean, the trauma of kind of that family conflict and then the stress of homelessness is often just there's too many pressures there, and also the risks and violence and exploitation while people are homeless. Of course, then the result is that there is a lot of suicide or drug use or mental illness as a consequence of all of those things, not actually driving the homelessness, but as a consequence of the homelessness. So that really highlights the importance of the work that services do in supporting people's well-being. So thanks for that. Any other can't speak up people? And there's a lot of people I can see that I know on this group. I'm not going to call you out, but I know you've definitely got a lot to contribute. So don't be shy. Speak up. What else do you think needs to happen to prevent child and youth homelessness? Rhonda, I was almost going to call you out, so there you go.
I'm glad you didn't, Kate. Look, I really just have a comment because there's not really much I can disagree with here today. But I suppose the key things for me are that whole concept of support being available to young people when they need it, and to be able to scale that up and down as needed. And the comment made about, going to a budgeting group, how to design a budget, I totally agree with. I mean, young people need to know you're there. Our support periods are ridiculous. I mean, you don't get past, unfortunately, workers often believe that they have the trust of the young person within the first 2 weeks. I mean, that just doesn't happen. I'm sure, Joelle, you would agree with that. I mean, it just doesn't happen. You have to be able to be there as required by the young person. It shouldn't be that the service is dictating how that support is delivered. I totally agree with that. And that kind of cluster model where support is available, but it's not 24/7. It is about allowing young people to be independent, to take those risks, to do that as safe as possible, but they're still, they should be able to take risks safely. And unfortunately, what we currently got, particularly with young women who worry me the most, there are so many out there couch surfing on really inappropriate couches, and there's no awareness of that. And so therefore there's no expectation that life can be any different. And it isn't until something really horrible happens that they start to hit the service system. So what do we do before we get to that point? I don't have the answer, but I think a good start is that place-based in the truest sense, that there are touch points that are visible and obvious, and of course have access to some kind of housing option that is safe. I'll stop now.
Thanks, Rhonda. And there was a hand up from Philippa, but now it's down.
Well, I was just actually going to add, and it's sort of kind of been touched on, certainly in Ballarat, where I'm from, I come across a lot of young people that who are homeless, or certainly at risk of homelessness, or experiencing some sporadic homelessness, that aren't reaching out to services because all the services have this high expectation that they will straight away engage in education and training. Like from the get-go, like you're not allowed to access the services unless you're willing to make that leap. And, we're in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're not in the space yet where they can even comprehend that sort of commitment or effort. And I think it puts a lot of young people in very vulnerable situations because they don't feel that they have the capacity to engage in the expectations that we expect from them straight away.
Yeah, thanks, Philippa. I think, yes,
That's
it can be, those support periods can be too short. Any other thoughts? I think one of the things that I feel like hasn't been mentioned is we've talked about supports to family, but I think maybe that there's more there in terms of the life course of the child and making sure that that family has everything that they need to thrive. And I think, I forget which colleague flagged, it might have been Natalie, around young people with a disability, but young people with all sorts of additional needs need that support from an early age. And parents might need support to appropriately parent a child who has any number of needs, because it's very difficult if we get to a point when a young person is, say, 15 and there's conflict generates, and perhaps there's a young person that's using violence in the home. But if there had been support at a much earlier period to deal with developmental issues or issues to appropriately parent that young person, then they might not have gotten to the point. It's quite difficult to address a situation where a adult-sized child is using violence as a late teenager, when I think that support could have gone in at an earlier stage. So I think there's an issue here in terms of talking about support across the life course, but also particular support. And one of the things that's great about the NDIS is that it does have the early, I forget what the acronym is, but early intervention support, so that children get the developmental support that they need with a range of different disabilities that create a need for that kind of support at a younger age. But I'm sure there's still young people who are missing out. Does anyone want to add into anything?
I suppose that's the concept of the seamless system from birth to young adulthood, when you're on your way and on your own. We don't have that anywhere. We put a fair big investment in early childhood, and that's necessary. Little brains are very plastic and vulnerable babies and children. And then there's sort of a big gap of not a lot being done. I think we have some welfare officers in primary schools, and I don't think anyone knows what they're doing exactly. There's various programs here and there, but there's a huge gap until we get to adolescence, when the young person's brain is again in a very plastic and developmental stage. And then a whole lot of stuff happens there. So, I mean, I agree with you, Kate. I think that sketches out huge holes that we've got in our system. And I guess I would argue that the only way to put all those pieces together is a place-based approach, where the community gets organised from woe to go. Instead of encouraging agencies to compete and programs to be particularly competitive, obviously a bit of competition is going to happen, but people need to much more be inclined to be working together to really address things and know that they're actually making some progress in a particular community. I'm sick of programs that are rolled out by governments where, when I sort of ask, well, what evidence is it that you're making any difference? I'm not going to name, because I'll only get myself in a lot of trouble at the moment when I don't really need it. But there's programs out there that are funded that do not achieve the outcomes with public money. And we could probably all name some. So, this is the impetus for reform. We need reform. And what we've been talking about is some of those reforms that are needed in the opportunities before us with the national plan. And we certainly need to take Paul's passion on board in terms of really trying to shake government up to give a priority to young people. Young people were supposedly had a priority and were a priority group in the previous agreement. And that meant fuck all. It meant nothing. It wasn't translated into any operational serious measures. And very little, in fact, was done, despite the mention of prevention, early intervention for young people. Very little was done until relatively recently, the last few years. And we really need to change that in the new agreement.
Before I go to you, Kate, can I just ask you, Joelle, what you think might have been useful to support your mum better when she's dealing with 4 kids in a small environment? Is it just that needed a bigger house, or was there other support that she needed for that to be a home where it would have been still a good place for you to be there?
Yeah, good question. I think both. We needed a bigger place. There was 4 teens and a mum who was very mentally unwell at the time. Just lost her house, lost her job, lost family members, went through her own trauma. She did have a housing worker, obviously, in that transitional house. It was small. It was 2-bedroom. So mum was on the couch, and it was just too small. We just needed, I guess, a bigger spot to thrive. And I would say, because it was mum who accessed the support, like the transitional house. The kids didn't have support workers. It was mum who had the support worker. So I always thought about, what if we had support workers? I know there's 4 of us, but maybe 1 even between 4. You know, what would have happened if we had our own support workers to take care of our own individual needs? I only saw the support worker in passing. Like, we literally would just walk past each other as I would walk out the house and she'd walk in. So we never had contact. We never spoke. So, yeah, it would have been great if we had our own support workers. Definitely. And, you know, I guess when you have your own support worker, that worker asks you, so what can I do for you? You know, they get to know who you are and they ask, what can I do for you now? What's going on for you now that I can support you with? Can I link you in with something? Is there something that's going to, help you right now? And that would have been great. But as I just wanted to also, I guess, just pose something. You know, we've just had a Royal Commission into family violence, right? And, you know, Paul said earlier that it's 30% of youth who've experienced domestic violence, who are accessing services. What would happen if if we know that domestic violence is the highest driver of homelessness? What would happen if the domestic violence and the family violence sector and the homelessness sector got together and worked more closely? Since we know that domestic violence is the #1 cause of homelessness, right? You know, we always speak about not wanting to work in silos, but we work in silos within our sector and we don't work with other sectors very well either. So what could we do in regards to the national plan in wanting to work with other sectors?
Gosh, Joelle, that's a great segue for me. Sorry, Kate, I might have to miss your question because we need to finish up, but there is another session coming up next week on the 5th of August on domestic and family violence. So together, working together across their sector and the homelessness sector to work out what do we need to do to end violence against women, to end homelessness for victim survivors of violence. So I think, there is a lot of prospect to do more in that overlap space. And then there's also the very particular issue, which even within the domestic and family violence sector often gets ignored, about the particular issues faced by young women who are experiencing family violence, or indeed young men experiencing violence as children in families, and not getting a family violence response, even though that's, what they're experiencing. So, and then there's another, I should also do a plug for, there's another consultation like this on child and youth homelessness, but whereas today's been looking at prevention, the other session is focused on what the homelessness service system, so once a young person has become homeless, how do we need to best respond to that homelessness. So you can find all of those sessions. If you're not getting the newsletter, you can sign up for it, or you can just see on the Homelessness Australia website, there's a page with all of those consultations listed. So check that out. Thanks everyone for participating. It's been a really great discussion. I hope you'll write a submission to the national plan and include all of these great points about how we prevent homelessness for children and young people. And look forward to seeing you at one of the other sessions. But anyway, thanks for participating in this one. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.